Yes, my welcome to everyone as well. There's a kind of strangeness to doing this sort of format, but with Lily's exceptional technical support, which we're very grateful for, we'll do our best to make it work. I think it's a really interesting program, mixing contributions from distinguished practitioners with a number of academics, and I'm thrilled that the first half-hour discussion is with Sir Richard Eyre, who was a producer, the main series producer of Play for Today at the end of the 1970s, having come from the theatre in Nottingham, working with a range of new writers in that context, including David Hare, Howard Brenton, and of course, particularly Trevor Griffiths. Richard's body of work within Play for Today and in television more generally is immensely distinguished and includes the genuinely wonderful Country, which was shown on BBC One on Monday evening, repeated at that point. But Richard also, as you I'm sure know, has an immensely distinguished career in the theatre and in opera directing, and indeed as an author, and was a great director of the National Theatre for a decade, following his work at the BBC. He's going to be prompted and questioned by Simon Farquhar, who was one of the consultants on Drama Out of a Crisis. Simon is a writer and dramatist, and also a immensely knowledgeable researcher who has written a manuscript about the early years of Play for Today, which has been enormously valuable in my research and in the thinking of John Hill and others, and elements of that are now being posted on John's Play for Today at 50 blog. So it's a joy to have both of you here. I'm going to pass over now control to Simon and Richard, and look forward to the discussion. Thanks so much.
So I've got a terrible echo here, but I'll work through it. Richard, I will launch straight into it. Can I ask you first, what was your attitude to television drama when you were growing up and in your early years working in the theatre?
I guess the television drama was my drama. I didn't go to the theatre. I didn't see a proper play until I was 16. I grew up in the rural wastelands of West Dorset. There were no theatres. The nearest theatre was in Bristol, and I was 16 before I saw a proper play, and the play I saw then was Hamlet. So I started at the top. So all drama essentially was drama I saw on television. So, and this is going back to, we got a television in 1953 for the coronation. So it's the years of long before Play for Today. There was the Wednesday play. There was classic plays. There were classic series. It was, and there was Shakespeare on TV. So that was my dramatic education, really, and it wasn't until I was 18, 19, till I was at university that I started to go to the theatre and practically stop watching television, because you didn't, as a student, nobody had a television. So yeah, it was always important to me, TV drama.
So was directing for television a part of your ambition at that time?
No, not at all, no. Making films, I didn't direct. When I was at university, I did a lot of acting, and I directed a short film starring Graham Garden, and Eric Idle, who were my contemporaries. And it was a sort of homage to Buster Keaton, the film. I had no aspirations at that stage to direct in the theatre. And if I had any aspirations to direct, it was to direct film. But
so
then
you've
I
been at
got
Nottingham Playhouse for several years. In 1978, you arrived at BBC. How did that come about?
I was just plucked out of nowhere. I worked with a lot of contemporary writers and a lot of young actors, and I knew people in the BBC drama department. And the job that I was being offered was Margaret Matheson's job, and Margaret had done a wonderful, I think, had been there for 5 years and was moving on. And there was a discussion with the then head of drama, head of plays, about who would succeed her. And she suggested a number of people, and I was one of them. I think might have had something to do with the fact I had worked with her then husband, David Eyre, a great deal. But I knew the constituency of the Play for Today writers, and knew a lot about Plays for Today. I'd seen from their inception, I think I'd seen very, very much, almost all of them.
And moving into television from the theatre, were you given any kind of training in how to work for television in a studio and on film?
Yeah. I went for a 6-week course, producer's course, which was in the Kensington building where the long lamented arts department, this was Alan Yentob's empire. And in the basement, they had a training area where producers were trained. And it was actually a completely wonderful course, because every day there was a new challenge. I remember the most interesting session was when an editor came in and he talked about editing and then gave us all some film, and there was about 5 minutes of film. There was about 10 to 15 different shots, and our task was to join the film together and make a coherent piece of film. About 2 hours into the session, I realized what the test was. And the test was that the true editing is not sticking together pieces of film, is making choices about what you show. And I then realized that there was only about, I thought, 30 seconds of material out of this 5 minutes that had any interest at all. And then when the teacher showed us his cut, it was about 6 seconds. And I learned that that's what editing, you've got to look so hard. I mean, it's like writers say that writing is not about writing, it's about rewriting, and editing, distillation. And I thought that was a wonderful lesson.
When you took over, you were working mainly on film, but also in the studio to some degree with comedians and parts of Waterloo Sunset. Was there a feeling at that time that working in the studio was not particularly desirable, or was it equally respected for its own merit?
No. There was very much a kind of a two-tier hierarchy. When I was engaged, I was asked to do 10 plays for today, and I sort of accept 10. Yeah, and it doesn't sound a great number. Of course, it was a catastrophically large number. I mean, enormously hard to produce 10 dramas in a calendar year. But 2 of those could be on film, and 8 had to be on the studio. And then the studio in those days meant multi-camera studio, and not exactly live, but you had probably, for a big drama like, let's say, Comedians, which I did for Play for Today, I think we had 3, if not 4 days in the studio, and you had 5 cameras at any one time, and you were in a control room, and the editor was a vision mixer who was cutting on the spot from one camera to another. So mostly the editing in the studio, multi-cameras, is the cuts are all in the wrong place, because they're all made on a move, on a, they're all sort of motivated by moves rather than in when you're cutting film. It's a much more subtle and much more three-dimensional procedure. And the sound in the studio was always very artificial. There was always a sort of hum, residual hum that you could never get rid of. The lighting was always quite, because it was multi-camera, was always inevitably quite crude. So there was a huge envy of film, and I think the most unsatisfactory thing was when you had a combination of film and then you cut to the studio, because the difference in just simply in the quality of the image between the film and studio was so, I thought, actually ridiculous. You always thought, oh, oh no, they're going outside, they're opening a door. And then you went into a world that had different color values and where the image had some sort of density. And so when I did multi-camera, and I tried to encourage writers not to go outside and directors to be comfortable with either you were making film or you were making studio, and make a virtue of the fact that it was in the studio, and
Sure.
that tape had its own qualities.
At the time you were working on the series, there were other producers working alongside you, Kenneth Trod. There were occasionally plays that seemed to be helicoptered in from elsewhere for the plot, even Solomon, produced by Anne Head, for example. Did you all have a close connection in what you were all working on, making sure you weren't?
Not at all. It was entirely casual. As you know, the TV Centre, which is now a block of luxury flats, was a circular building. It's a donut building, and was so, when television, BBC was at its height, the Japanese broadcasting company thought it must have something to do with the shape of the building. And so they built a replica for a Japanese state television. I don't know if it worked for them, but no, because the fifth floor was the drama department, plays department, series was a different floor, I think. You'd walk around and talk to people, talk to other producers. And so it was very much a canteen culture. I shared, I was in an office, there was a sort of central office, this was replicated all around the building, all around the floor, central office with 2 assistants, they were called secretaries, and there was Ken Trod on one side and me on the other side. So Ken and I had a lot of conversation. I learned a lot from Ken. I learned about crewing, how you had to get in very early to get the best crew. And I thought naively that you had to have a project, but Ken told, no. The point is you just say, I'm going to be doing a play on these dates. So you've got the best camera person, you got the best sound person, designer, and so on. And if you didn't, you lost out. And there was a definite sort of pecking order. The other thing I learned from Ken was how to work BBC expenses.
So let's talk about some specific productions here. Comedians, which you'd already directed at Nottingham Playhouse. Was that your idea to bring that to television? And did you consider doing something different with it for a different medium?
Well, it met the criteria, exacting criteria of what can you do plausibly in a medium that has, where you have to use multi-cameras, you have a short time in order to record the drama, and it's all interior, and it's a small company, so it filled the budget and the technical and aesthetic requirements, and it was in many senses a perfect play for today, because it could be, I could make a virtue of the having to shoot in a studio. You
made some changes to the production. There is some footage in existence of the original Nottingham Playhouse production, and a couple of things are very noticeably different. One is the television version is a lot snappier. It moves very, very slickly. Obviously, there's advantage working close up with cameras than in a theatre, but there's also some casting differences. Was that just because some people weren't available, or was there a desire to sort of give it a jolt?
There was people weren't available, and Jimmy Jewell, who had played the teacher, actually Bill Fraser, who played it on television, was the actor who had been initially offered it at Nottingham and couldn't do it because he was doing a TV series. So when he became free, and it was a painful decision because Jimmy Jewell had given birth to the part, we did cast Bill Fraser, but no, Stephen Ray wasn't available. He'd been in the original cast. Couple of others, Dave Hill, yes, wasn't available. So no, it was purely the compulsion of expediency.
Sure. Moving on to Just a Boys Game, which is an incredible film, written by Peter McDougall, who was the first person I ever interviewed when I was researching Play for Today. And I've never drunk so much in my life. Thankfully, the next time I interviewed him, he didn't even remember me. This was originally commissioned by Margaret Matheson, fallen through, and then you commissioned Peter for it.
No, it wasn't commissioned by Margaret.
Ah, no. Peter's wrong there.
No, it wasn't commissioned by Margaret. Not at all. No, I sought out Peter because I had seen two of the plays for today that I'd most enjoyed was Just Another Saturday and Elephant's Graveyard. And so it wasn't one of the commissions that I inherited from Margaret. I inherited two. One was a Mike Stott play called Soldiers Talking Cleanly, which is, I think, rather terrific. And I think it still exists, worth watching. Wonderful cast. And the other was a Mike Leigh film, which was, what was it called? It was about middle class. It was the first time Mike had made a film about the middle class, and it was still, he was still rehearsing it, and I took over as producer from Margaret on that, and I like the film a lot. No, Peter. Peter's an indescribably wonderful man who is, if you think of a slightly more anarchic version of Billy Connolly, you have an idea of what a night out with Peter McDougall was. A very, very gifted man. He worked in the shipyard and came from Greenock, and he wrote in a calligraphic hand. He wrote in pencil, absolutely beautiful handwriting. And he wrote very, very slowly, so slowly that I had to lock him in an office at the BBC. And I said, for every page you write, Peter, I will push a £5 note under the door. And this is how, and eventually we got the script, and the film was directed by John Mackenzie, who directed the other two films. John, who was sadly no longer with us, but director of The Long Good Friday, wonderful director, Scottish director. So no, it was hard work getting the script out of Peter, and then Peter's delightful. Then when we first watched the film, Peter went absolutely crazy because because John had made a few changes, minor changes, but during the first screening, Peter was, yeah, bastard, and it was, and there was wonderful. I remember this very clearly. Peter wanted to write a scene that John didn't want, and they were practically. I had to practically separate them. And John was saying to Peter McNiven, you can write it, but I'm not going to shoot it.
Moving on, you have the honour of producing the highest rated play for today of all time. 14.5 million people watched Robert Holman's Chance of a Lifetime. Could you tell us something about commissioning and making a film with Robert Holman, who up to that point had just written plays for small-scale theatres, Bush, the Royal Court?
Robert was fantastically anxious about this, the first time he'd worked for television, hugely anxious that he would be sucked into a machine. For him, coming from writing for small theatres, writing for what he thought of the BBC was sort of like, he thought he was working Hollywood. And it was hard. I remember walking around the 5th floor with him, trying to talk him down from this terror of being consumed and taken over, and that his writing would lose out. And in fact, it didn't at all. There was a very, very sensitive production film, and it was one of the rare film projects. Giles Foster directed it. It was a very, very touching story about a young boy who joined the army, age of 16, from the northeast, and joined the army, was sent to Belfast and killed, and the effect on his family and community. It went out. Now, that Plays for Today used to go out at 9:25 after the 9 o'clock news. And this will sound like a fairy story, but in those days, one was told, try and come up with, has to be contemporary work that challenges the audience. So here was this really lovely film. ITV at that time was subject to franchise renewal every so often, and they were coming up for the franchise renewals, and they had to demonstrate that their heart was deeply committed to the arts. And so they showed, I think it was a production of Don Carlo, a very opera, that night, and it took up 3 hours. So it took up the whole of ITV1, this was pre-Channel 4, ITV's nightly schedule this night. So in response to that, the nation switched to Play for Today, and 14 million of them watched this very touching, quite gentle and desperately sad an important film, politically important, I think.
As we near the end, just two last things. We can do a bit of myth busting here. Another play which commissioned, which had already been on at a theatre, was Pillion by Paul Cox, which was a rather unlucky production and was never broadcast. Can you just share your memories of that?
Yes, it was sad. I saw the play. It's a play by an actor, Paul Copley. I saw the play at the Bush Theatre, liked the play very much, small cast, and I thought would work. And I had an empty slot and it would work as a studio, part film, part studio. And I got a director who, it's enormously hard to, for any director to gain purchase in television. And this was a guy who'd been a very, very good assistant, floor assistant, and wanted to direct, and I gave him a chance. And it was the only time that the head of plays, James Kethlin Jones, really didn't like the play when it was finished. And I thought it was certainly, by the standards of the time, uncontroversial in almost every respect, and well worth showing. But anyway, he said, no, I don't want this shown. So it was just written off, sadly, and I don't know if it even exists anymore.
It does exist. Yes.
I thought it was a terrible shame.
Last question then. In the 1990s, you came back to the BBC on the Board of Governors. How did it compare at that time with the BBC that you'd your craft in the late 70s?
Well, the BBC, when I was working, it was eloquently described to me by a friend of mine, a writer called Tom Clark, wonderful writer who wrote several plays for Today. Stocker's Copper was one of his. And he, when I first joined the BBC, took me on a walk around the 5th floor. And he said to me, what you've got to understand is that the BBC is a cross between the church and the post office. And it's that combination of high moral aspiration and a sort of portentousness and plodding bureaucracy. And he said, you know, the two elements will try and trap you, but you know, you have to work between the gaps, within the gaps. It changed because John Burke came in, and in many respects, John was a breath of fresh air. I think most of his changes were virtuous changes, but I think there were two disastrous elements or aspects of his changes. One was the manner in which they were done, which was imperious, insensitive, and in many ways mistaken strategy. And the other was he demanded that the salaries of all management were elevated to be in roughly the same quartile as the equivalent managers in commercial television. And I thought that savaged a principle of public service broadcasting. And it used to infuriate me on the Board of Governors that the managers, the BBC managers, would endlessly invoke the mantra of public service broadcasting and their duty to public service broadcasting, while at the same time lobbying for higher and higher salaries. And I said it is immoral and will destroy the BBC if you don't maintain the sense that you work for the BBC not because you get a whopping great salary, but because you believe in the criteria the principles of public service broadcasting. I said, and look at the British Museum, the Royal Opera House, the National Theatre, the Tate Gallery. They are, people running all those organizations are, in my view, as important as senior managers at the BBC, but are receiving a quarter of what BBC managers are getting paid. You're all getting paid much more than civil servants you deal with, much more than politicians. And it just exacerbated that long-standing contempt that politicians have for the BBC. They cannot bear the fact that the state broadcasting company isn't controlled by the state, but has an autonomous control. And that's why government after government keeps trying to provide some sort of stranglehold, and they've got the Royal Charter, and they long just to blow it up.
Thank you very much, Sir Richard. That was absolutely fascinating. It was a great pleasure to talk to you. I'm going to hand back to John now, I think.
Thank you, Simon. Richard, thank you so much. A wonderful analysis of John Burt's BBC, apart from anything else, but really excellent memories, a really great start to our day. We are immensely grateful. I remain immensely grateful for your contribution to the film as well, and I think we probably all, I'm sure, indeed, we are all immensely grateful for the incredible work that you did on the series and that you have continued to do in so many other forms since then, and long may that continue. Many thanks too to Simon, struggling slightly with his audio, but immaculate in his in structuring his questions. So thank you both.